Well, folks, in today's video, we're going to be trying to get this vintage TYCO Century 430 chassis system locomotive running again. This was a locomotive which was sent in nearly a year ago from a gentleman by the name of Charles Cummings. I can't remember exactly what's wrong with it. We tested it back then and it had some sort of a problem. But this is an old TYCO power torque, and these things are notorious for having a whole variety of different issues. So I suspect it's going to be one of the most common ones. Probably just a problem with the motor or the drive system, because that's pretty much what all of these have in terms of issues. But yeah, they're usually not too hard to fix. So hopefully we'll be able to get this one riding the rails once again. Anyway, to try to figure out what the problem is more in detail, we're going to take this thing over to the track, test it out, see if we can kind of get some signs from it of what's happening. And yeah, then we'll go from there. Let's get started. So I'm just going to set this thing up on the track, and we're going to give it some power. You can really learn a lot from giving an engine that doesn't run power, because you can just notice little details which can sort of explain a little bit of what's going on. So we'll put this one on, and we see right there we actually have a working light. So that actually tells us that the engine is picking up power. So we know that the electrical systems, at least up until that light, are working properly. You know, there's power flowing up through the wheels, but we don't hear any humming from the motor. Now, if you put an engine on the track and you hear humming from the motor, you know the motor's getting power, but if it's not moving, it means it's seized or something like that. In this case, we've got a light, so the engine's getting power, but we're not hearing anything from the motor. So that means that somewhere in between the wires that are going to this light and the motor, or just the wires going from the truck to the motor, there is some sort of a problem. On old TYCOs, it's usually the brushes. It could be a broken soldering joint, but if I were to take a bet, it's probably the brushes. In some other cases, you'll put an engine on the track and neither will come on. You won't hear humming from the motor, or you won't see anything from a headlight. That can mean pretty much two things. The first one is the engine's just not picking up power. There's an electrical problem. The other one's a short circuit. If you ever get an engine with a short circuit, the way you can tell is you can put another locomotive on the track, which works, and if you give it full power, if the other engine doesn't move or it moves really slow, you'll know it's a short circuit. Because on my controller, I've got a amps meter, so I can tell immediately if these are shorted, but if you don't have that, that's a trick you can use. Anyway, why don't we bring this thing over to the workbench and crack it open, see if we can find exactly what the problem is now. So we're now going to disassemble this locomotive. It's really not that hard to do on these old power torques. You just sort of get a flat heads under here and just remove the clips. And sometimes you need to come around to both sides a couple times just to get it right. There goes our bit. But here we are inside the motor. At this point, you can pull this out and take it out. You do that on both sides usually, but in this case it was already loose. And then you're going to want to remove this part. I find usually if you just sort of squeeze it, there might be one side that's better than the other, but usually you just want to squeeze it so that the top part opens up a little. And you see, you just kind of twist it a little, and it comes out like that, and then you can gain access to all of these parts and see exactly what's going on. I'm also going to remove this bottom part here too, so I'm just going to get a Phillips head for that. If I were to take a guess, I'm like 90% sure it's going to be the brushes on this model. They're probably just really gummed up with old lubricants. These TYCO power torques were never really designed that well. The pancake motor, since it's mounted with the commutator right beside a bearing, if you oil that bearing, the lubricant will actually leak out, and then the rotation of the motor will sort of spit the oil out across the commutator. So it's a really common problem that these engines have, which is that after they've been oiled, the commutator gets all grimy because there's so much friction and heat in here. Like, the oil dries out really, really quickly. So I bet when we open this up, that's exactly what we're gonna find. We've just got a flatheads. On paper, you'd want to remove these two pieces, but I find in a lot of cases these have been melted and they're just kind of brittle, so I usually just remove the plate here and get the brushes in another way. This is not the most professional way, I could say, but I get, you're trying to work with what you have, basically. So this is just what I usually do. I'm pretty sure somebody might have been inside this model before, though, and I'll tell you why. It's because we got a flatheads here and a Phillips head right there. So I've never seen that before. So if I were to take a guess, at some point somebody removed a screw, they lost it, and they happen to have a similar one which worked, so they decided to put that in there. Just a guess. Now, you have to be really, really careful whenever you lift up this cover, because of course there are springs and brushes behind here, and I lose them all the time. So, if you're not careful, you just have to be really gentle. And there are both of our springs and brushes. They're all in good shape, actually, which is something I'm surprised to see. And in fact, this whole commutator on the inside isn't that bad either. I thought this was going to be really grimy, so my whole theory might be wrong. But we're going to clean this out anyway. It's just a good thing to do. Another thing I will note too, the springs are in really good shape. Sometimes you open these things up and they're all like misshapen. You need to have decent tension pushing against the commutator for these things to work properly. So if you got bad springs, you've either got to replace them, or sometimes what I usually do is just stretch them back out. It's not great, but when you're working with engines that are only worth a few bucks, you just don't want to be spending too much money sinking lots of parts into them. Anyway, let's clean this up. So in order to clean this, we're just going to use our fiberglass pencil. It's super easy to do. You just really, just rub it over the surface of the commutator, and you can see it strips off all the oxidization or bad lubricants, carbon deposits, really like whatever is preventing this from working well or at all, it will remove it. So we just go at that for a while until it's nice and shiny, and then we're also going to clean out the spaces on the commutator. This looks to have already kind of scraped most of it out, but just to be sure, we'll take a little toothpick and just make sure that there's nothing in there. It's super important to make sure that there's nothing in here, because sometimes it can be hard to see, but there's a little piece of something, and if it's in there, it's going to make the motor run less efficiently, and in some cases it can actually burn out the commutator, because that's pure heat being generated between those two plates when you've got a short like that. So it's really important to check these on really any locomotive that you work on. So anyway, that's looking pretty good. I'll clean off the brushes too, and then we'll reassemble this motor. Maybe we'll test it out just to make sure everything is in order, and then we'll start to look in some other places for any potential trouble. But so far things are actually not looking too bad, so that's good. Now this is by no means a good way to put one of these things back together. Again, removing the metal plates on the top is how these things were really intended to be put back together, but again, I just find that it's a lot of trouble. So this is not a good way, but if you can pull it off, it works. Alright, so hopefully that all is back together as it should be. Let's test the road. Nothing, eh? That's very suspect. I don't know exactly why it's not starting. There's also a chance that the brushes just popped out right as I was putting them in. Yeah, you can see that light's coming on, but we're not getting anything from the motor. So yeah, we clearly still have some sort of electrical issue. So I guess this is coming back open again. I'll see, without losing the brushes, if I can have a look to make sure that they're making contact with the commutator, because really that's the only explanation of what could be wrong with this. Unless, of course, the motor is actually damaged, but I'd be very surprised if a wire going to multiple coils was broken. Yeah, I think we lost a brush. So back open this goes. Yeah, that one actually got stuck. That's weird. Springs have what looks to be decent tension. I mean, like that would, in theory, do its job pretty well, but yeah, I don't know. That seems to be a lot of trouble. I think I'm just gonna, the plates on this one look good enough. I think I'm just going to put them in the way they were intended to be installed. I really hope this thing starts up after that. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't sound like the healthiest, but it just needs a bit of oil, honestly. All right, good. We've got somewhere. Now we just need to lubricate this whole thing and reassemble it. Usually, I would clean out the gears and stuff on here, but like they look super clean. I think somebody cleaned this out because usually there'd be all sorts of old grease and crap. So yeah, this really is not that bad. So we'll just put some oil on here and I guess just make sure the electrical contacts are clean. Maybe work on the back truck and this thing should be good to go. So we'll put a little bit of oil right there, and you want to put some on top of this gear because of course there's a little bit of friction between these two gears, so you see that will just sort of lubricate. These ones seem to be clearing each other pretty well, but you just want to, anywhere where there could be friction, you want to put some oil to help reduce it. So we'll put a little on that bearing, and you can put some right there too. Just let it go in there. You can oil this bearing right here, but you have to be super, super careful. Like I'm not even going to squeeze the bottle. I'm just going to go like that and take off any excess. See, like that already was too much there. So we need to prevent that from sinking in. Because again, like this bearing, it's so close to the commutator that any oil that comes out here, the rotation of the motor is just going to spit it all out all over the commutator, and it's going to burn, and it's going to ultimately trash the commutator. So, you know, it's not really worth it. Plus, it's plastic on metal. There's not a lot of friction there to begin with, so you don't need very much lubricant. But on all the gears and everything else, it's pretty important to make sure that these are all lubricated properly, otherwise this is not going to perform well. I mean, not that these are great performers anyway, but, you know, make them what they can be best. These wheels are really not looking great, so I'm going to clean them up with either a track cleaner or maybe my fiberglass pencil. It doesn't really matter, but it will definitely work a lot better if we fix all this up. So we got these both looking a lot better, so they're pretty much ready to go back inside the model. We're going to put some lubricant in here, but we're going to put conductive lubricant because if you put a regular lubricant in here, you know, it will do the lubrication just fine as it should. But if it's not conductive, it might inhibit how well power can flow through the bearings. It might even prevent the power from flowing through the bearings, so it's not what you want. But if you put a conductive lubricant, not only will it lubricate, but it will also actually improve how well the locomotive sends power to the motor. So it does both jobs really well. So always use conductive lubricant when oiling bearings, which also pick up power. All right, we can probably put the bottom back on now. All right, I'm also just going to open this up quickly and I'll clean the wheels, lubricate the bearings, and then I think this model will be ready to go. Alright, put some conductive lubricant, and then I'll just throw the wheels, which are now all nice and shiny, back in. Alright, I think this thing is ready to go. Well, it's now time to see if our efforts have paid off. I'm feeling, fairly optimistic, but then again, it is an old TYCO engine, so yeah. Alright, I'm putting power in the track. It's not moving. Hey, there we go! Well, it's not sounding the greatest, but I mean, it's running not too badly. It's running consistently, which is pretty nice for an old TYCO. Headlights shining nice and bright. I think I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah, no, it's really not too bad. Now let's check out reverse. It actually runs a lot better in reverse than it does forwards. Sometimes that can happen just with how the parts wear. Well, why don't we put some train cars behind this thing and have it pull some freight around. That does not look too bad in my opinion. Really happy with how this thing is running actually. I wish that clicking noise would go away, but I'm not entirely sure what the source of that problem is. But in any case, it's running consistently, and it's even hauling some freight around, which is pretty nice. So yeah, overall I'm very pleased with this repair. I think it turned out pretty well. Well, folks, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed. Charles, if you're watching this, thank you so much again for sending this locomotive. It really was quite a joy to get to work on, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. Anyways, with that, I'd like to thank you all so much for watching.